Hello, American Studies 10. Hey, I wanted to put together a little video so we can kind of go over this first section together. I sent out earlier an audio file study guide that if you listen to the audio file, it went play by play right through the section and talked about these issues we're going to talk about today. So, what I'm going to talk about isn't exactly along with the study guide, but it's going to follow it pretty closely. So I just wanted to start with looking at the fact that in the 1930s, there were several things happening in Europe that really would lead to World War. The Second World War would end up being much worse than the First World War in terms of overall scope and scale. So we're going to start with looking at Europe after the Great Depression and after World War One. World War One was fought in Europe, therefore much of Germany and France had been destroyed, and so at the end of the war, the Treaty of Versailles just started to make things worse because the winners tried to punish the losers. So France and America mostly wanted to punish Germany, so they took land from Germany. They made them slash their military. They made them pay war reparations, which are payments that the losers pay to the winners. And last but not least, probably the hardest thing for Germany to take is they made them sign what was called the War Guilt Clause. That meant that they blamed Germany for World War One, and this left Germany enraged. It's like beating someone when they're already down. So they had already lost the war. Now their economy is completely in shambles because of the Great Depression, which happened after World War One. So this left a void that would be filled by the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party started talking about how the treaty had betrayed Germany and how they needed to be proud of their country again, and they needed to rebuild their country, and that really appealed to many Germans after World War One. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union in 1924, Stalin took power after the Russian Revolution that happened in 1917. So in the revolution, the king and queen were executed, and the the Soviets, or what was called the Bolshevik Party, took over, and what they wanted was a state based on workers where everybody would pretty much be equal. That's kind of the premise for communism. Um, Stalin ended up being a really bad guy. He was responsible for the murder of between 8 and 13 of his own million of his own people. He just absolutely was paranoid, and if anything was a threat to him or the party, he just had them killed and eliminated or sent to what was called a gulag, which is a prison way out in Siberia, in the Siberian wasteland. So he fundamentally transformed what was Russia, now the Soviet Union, into a totalitarian state that used communism as their as the economic model, which means that in a communist country, nobody is allowed to own anything. Everything belongs to the state. You have no power, you have no rights like we do in America. You do as you're told, and it's nothing about the individual is important. It's all about what's important to the state. So fundamentally, the United States and the Soviet Union were polar opposites, and this would lead to some conflict between us after World War II. One thing Stalin did do, though, is he turned it from a very agrarian, backwards society into a more industrial nation. And actually, during the late 30s, the Soviet Union was the second largest economy in the world behind the United States. Meanwhile, in Italy, a fascist by the name of Benito Mussolini took power and established a fascist state by 1921. So he actually rose to power before Hitler and the Nazis, and Hitler looked at Mussolini and actually really was impressed by what he did in Italy, and Hitler and Mussolini became friends and allies later on toward World War II, or toward the beginning of the war. The one thing that makes fascism a little different is it stresses a strong military and the importance of the state. But in the fascist Italy, private land ownership was a thing. It wasn't a communist country. In fact, the fascists were anti-communist. Mussolini wanted to restore Italy to its grandeur during the Roman Empire. So that's why Italy would then invade North Africa and Ethiopia and really wanted to dominate the whole Mediterranean region. So Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933 after the Nazis won the most votes in the German parliament. So he wasn't directly elected, he was appointed because the Nazis had the most um, people in the parliament. Um, the Nazis were different. They had a very strong racist part of their platform. They believed in the purity of the Northern European people, or what they called the Aryan people. We're talking people from the Nordic people of Northern Germany, fair skinned, blonde hair, blue eyes, and they thought that they would be that should be the master race. Therefore, if you weren't Aryan, you were persecuted. Especially Jewish people were persecuted heavily, starting in 1933 by the Nazis. Um, the the main part of Hitler's plan was to restore Germany to its greatness and to completely scrap the Treaty of Versailles. So immediately he began to rebuild the military. He revamped the economy, put people back to work building military machines mostly, and then he dreamed of an expansionist type of policy where he wanted to get what was called Lebensraum, or living room, for Germans, because there were 65 million people living in Germany and it was quite crowded. He thought that they should be able to spread out, especially to the east and to the western part of the Soviet Union, and that was his plan. While all of this chaos is happening in Europe, the United States was kind of acting like an ostrich, stuck its head in the sand and tried to ignore what was going on. We we wanted to stay isolationist, which means that we didn't want to get embroiled in those foreign problems, and we just wanted to stay out of it. And so we passed the Neutrality Acts in order to keep us out of war. That prohibited us from helping nations at war with either loans or military supplies. Um, we actually, it said in the book that FDR actually got around this in China because China and Japan were not officially at war. So we helped the Chinese against the Japanese. But so this is just going to set up to kind of serve as a cautionary tale. And in other words, you've got dictators all over Europe that are just starting to run rampant, and it's going to grow out of control and start a war. And that's kind of what happened. And we look now at maybe our policy should be to try to put out small fires before they get huge. But in this case, we're going to have to completely mobilize our country to try to win World War II. And that's going to be coming up here in a couple more sections. I hope this helps you kind of get a good idea of what this section was about. It kind of sets the stage for what caused World War II. In the next section, we're going to look at what actually happened in the war in Europe, starting in 1939, and then up through the fall of France. So this is before America joined the war, but just kind of what happened in terms of Hitler and Mussolini battling against the Soviet state under Stalin. Until then, keep hard at work, and if you have questions, make sure you email me or get in contact with me some way. For now, I'm gonna let you get back to your work. I hope this helps.